Homosexuality of both sexes, namely man and woman, is a natural manifestation which is against nature. By Billy Edward Albert Meyer, translation by Vibke Walder of Australia and Bruce Lully of USA.
Homosexuality is a kind of sexuality that occurs naturally, yet it is against nature. Occurring naturally, yet being against nature in this case means that the kind of sexuality appears through a natural process which, however, cannot serve the law of natural procreation. Consequently, this kind of sexuality is against nature, that is to say, a naturally occurring kind that is against nature. Homosexuality is a kind of sexuality that is based on genetics, wherefore it is considered natural, but due to the impossibility of procreation, it is categorized as being against nature. Hence, homosexuality is called a naturally occurring kind of sexuality that is against nature. Homosexuality is a naturally occurring kind of sexuality that is against nature, which would never be prohibited by any of the nature-based creational laws and recommendations. It is therefore considered naturally normal, although against nature, simply due to the impossibility of procreation. Certain genes and their characteristics determine the kind of sexuality and therewith also homosexuality. However, genes and their characteristics, in turn, are a tiny piece of nature and are thus integrated into the natural laws and recommendations. This in turn means that nothing in the sense of that which is natural can be against nature if nature allows or even creates it, out of which it inevitably follows that homosexuality is a natural manifestation which is simply against naturalness because no possibility of procreation exists. Since homosexuality furthermore is a natural manifestation and is hence natural, it cannot and must not be considered, judged or condemned as Ausartung and as unnatural, and equally not as reprehensible, as detestable, and not as contravening natural or human law. That which is referred to as transgression against natural law and as unnatural, however, is the sodomitical, ausgeartet, homosexuality and the bisexuality, therefore a sexual gratification with and on animals and other creatures and so forth of any kind. This form of a sexual kind namely develops exclusively through the thinking and the fantasies of the human being, with which he or she might even able to influence the genes and their characteristics, wherethrough the human being can create her own predisposition for that. This Sponsion then corresponds to an Ausartung, something which is against the naturalness and is a transgression against the laws of nature as described in the following verses on homosexuality in the book Genesis, page 163, homosexuality, available in German only.
11. The connection of two life forms of the same species, that is to say, of the same kind and sex in a physical form, occurring between male and male as well as between female and female of human beings is referred to as homosexuality. 12. Amongst all male life forms, homosexuality is a kind of sexuality against nature, however it is nature-formed, and, as it is with all female life forms, also a natural regulation. See Talmudic Manual, the 12th chapter, verses 8-10, explanations in the Canon 24 and 32, the is only available in German. 13. Sexual connections between male and male are kinds of sexuality and
Ausartungen,
actions that have fallen out of the main purpose, namely the procreation of offspring, against the nature of the procreation of offspring, and indeed gene-conditioned as a form which is natural and against nature, however against nature because insemination and insemination join together in a wrong procreation act, wherethrough no offspring is procreated, but only the drive for revelry can be gratified, which, however, in no wise contravenes a creational natural law. 14. Although this is a form of
Ausartung
against the nature of procreation, it exists thus in a gene-conditioned and nature-based wise such that the homosexuality is lived out through male life forms with naturally given, however gene-based, sexual drives which are formed against nature, and indeed because a same-sex desire for sexual practices appears, pregiven by genes, which, however, is natural and against nature but is not reprehensible in any form. 15. This form of sexual activity may not only come about in male human life forms with their own homophile drives, but also in female human life forms, as it does generally also amongst animal life forms, who as such are misled through the nature of the genes which are formed in a wise that is natural and against nature, that is to say, of
Ausartung,
and which, through factors of religious irrational teachings, and so forth, are wrongly referred to, insulted and even persecuted as uncontrolled perversion desires and disorderly sexual lusts and practices.
An instinct sensing that is of Ausartung, and a self-created desire in perverse form that is against nature, as well as a human being's own homophile selfishness, are interpreted as the creation of a pseudo-homosexuality that is created through a human being's own thoughts and fantasies, and which transgresses against the natural creational laws and recommendations, and consequently represents an Ausartung. This form of homosexuality shows no characteristic whatsoever of the one that is natural and against nature, and therefore is a nature-based and gene-conditioned homosexuality. As a rule, the homosexuality of Ausartung, hence the pseudo-homosexuality that is self-created through thoughts and fantasies, is paired with other and likewise self-created kinds of sexuality abnormalities and contrarinesses against the laws of nature, such as sodomy, masochism, sadism and so forth.
Homosexual men, by definition, cannot perform sexual acts with one another, but solely and exclusively indulge in a sexual gratification, as is explained in the book Canon 24. Page 93, verse 138.
138. The man cannot be childbearing, so there cannot be a procreative sexual contact from man to man or between man and man. This would then be a transgression against the guidance of the creation and against its laws and recommendations, and against the sevenfold regulation.
Homosexual men, therefore, cannot practice sexual acts with one another, but solely and exclusively only sexual gratification. The reason for this definition is that men are not capable of reproduction amongst and with one another. Thus, an actual sexual act can only occur when a possibility of procreation exists, as is the case with two human beings of different sex, with man and woman. All other sexual acts, where no possibility of procreation exists, as between two men, are simply defined as sexual gratification. Of course, the sexual life of two partners of different sex, of whom one or both are infertile, is also considered as sexual act. Of importance here is only that the two are of a different sex. This is how the facts are explained by the teaching of the creational energy.
When now in the book Canon 24, page 93, verse 139, it is stated that a homosexual coming together of man and man is punishable, then this means that a culpability arises when homosexual men come together in such a wise that they make themselves capable of birthing in a form that is against nature and outrageous, for example, through genetic manipulation, and so forth, and then enter into sexual relationships in order to procreate offspring.
139. Thus, The man transgresses against the guidance of the creation in this concern if he joins with another man in an outrageous form of contact for a sexual act in order to procreate offspring. Thus he will be culpable and for his lifetime will be sent to a place of fulfillment of guidelines, and therefore also a similar measure shall apply when a man or a woman joins with life forms of a different kind, for example, animals and other creatures.
Also the verses 8 and 12 of the Talmud Manual, the 12th chapter, pages 105 and 108, refer to the same subject as the above-mentioned one in verse 139 of the
8. However, if two men lie down, sleep, with each other against nature, in a homosexual form that is contrary to nature, for the purpose of procreating offspring in the male body by means of gene manipulation, then they shall be delivered over to the courts, for those fallible are unworthy of life and its laws and act against these, therefore they shall be emasculated, excluded from society and from the other sex, and expelled and banished before the people.
On the 27th of August 2010, Patar shared with Billy that the Pleasurean linguists had given him the following explanation for
Ausartung
in the English language.
Ausartung
Means very bad, get out of the control of the good human nature. Fallout would also be possible instead of get out.
Ausartung
Is bad getting out, resp. Falling out of the control of rightly being human in the real and true sense. In Genesis,
Ausartung
is explained in such a way, among others, these inclined and gotten out of control doings, of the type of fundamental purpose, fallen doings.
Ausarten
Is not translated as
to degenerate,
as this form of
Ausarten
has nothing to do with degeneration, but rather with a
bad fall from the control of the good nature of the human being.